At my daughter's startup pitch, she introduced me as, "Just here for moral support." Her partner whispered, "Don't let him talk, he's from the analog age." Investors looked away until I pulled out my briefcase and revealed. I never thought I'd feel this kind of burn sitting in my own daughter's big moment. I was in San Francisco for Jenna's big startup pitch, the culmination of years of her hard work. I'd flown in the night before, stayed at a cheap hotel downtown. I wore a plain blue blazer, khakis, and my old leather shoes that could have used a shine. I'd also brought my trusty old briefcase, the same one I'd carried for 20 years running my own business back in Ohio. The meeting room was sleek, all glass walls and chrome chairs, like something out of a movie. Jenna looked sharp in her tailored black suit, her hair tied back. She was glowing with confidence, standing there with her co-founder, Mark. There were about 8 investors in the room. Men in expensive suits, a couple of women in sharp blouses and tight ponytails. They didn't look at me much. I could feel it. They were here for Jenna's vision, not her old man. Jenna started introducing the team. Mark got a nice intro. "This is Mark, my brilliant co-founder, who's been instrumental in our tech stack and scaling strategy." Then she got to me. She smiled real quick, almost like an afterthought. "This is my dad, he's just here for moral support." Just moral support. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart sank a little, but I kept my expression neutral. I knew she wanted to stand on her own. I respected that. But it still hit. Then Mark leaned in, and I swear to God, he whispered, right in front of me, thinking I wouldn't hear. "Don't let him talk, he's from the analog age." Analog age? I sat there stunned. Like I wasn't even in the room. The investors all chuckled softly, the way people do when they think they're in on the joke. A couple of them smirked, like they already knew how this was gonna go. They leaned back in their chairs, flipping through the glossy pitch decks Jenna and Mark had handed out. They weren't impressed. I could see it already. Jenna and Mark launched into their pitch, some AI platform for small business inventory tracking. Their slides were sleek, lots of graphs and buzzwords, scalable, cloud-native, predictive insights. But the investors' faces were already drifting. A few of them checked their watches. One woman even took out her phone, scrolling quietly. I watched it happen, minute by minute, like a slow leak in a tire. Jenna's voice wavered just slightly. Mark kept rambling, throwing out jargon, getting a bit defensive when a man in the back asked about user adoption rates. I sat there, gripping the handle of my old briefcase, feeling the sweat on my palms. I knew I should stay quiet. This was her moment, after all. But I couldn't. Not like this. So I stood up. The room went dead silent. Jenna shot me a sharp look, like, "Dad, what are you doing?" Mark's face twisted into a tight, polite smile, but his eyes were pure panic. I walked slowly to the front of the room, feeling every eye on me. I set the briefcase on the table, old, scratched, the leather faded from years of use. I clicked open the latches. The sound echoed. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I know I was introduced as just moral support, but I think I might have something worth showing." I pulled out a thick folder. Inside, market research reports, over 100 pages, printed and annotated by hand, detailed competitor analysis, breaking down the top 5 players in the space, patent applications I had filed for the exact algorithm they were pitching, a binder of signed letters of intent from small businesses across the Midwest who had already agreed to pilot this platform. Real businesses, real revenue streams. I could feel the shift in the room, like air being sucked back in. The investors leaned forward, flipping through the papers. Their eyes lit up. I looked at Mark. His face had gone pale, lips tight. Jenna just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. One of the investors, a gray-haired man in a pinstriped suit, asked, "Where did this data come from?" "My own research," I replied. "I've been building businesses for 30 years. The algorithm you're talking about?" I designed a version of it 10 years ago when I ran my own logistics company. I've been refining it since. Mark started to say something, but I raised a hand. Let me finish. I laid it all out, how the patents were already filed under my name, how I'd been working behind the scenes, how the entire business model had been refined and tested with actual customers, not just a pitch deck. The investors were asking rapid-fire questions now. I answered every single one, clear and direct. Jenna was just standing there, frozen. Mark had gone completely quiet, staring daggers at me. When the pitch ended, the room felt completely different. The investors were nodding, engaged. A couple even asked for follow-up meetings on the spot. As they left, one shook my hand and said, "You're the real brains behind this, aren't you?" I didn't answer. Jenna barely looked at me as we packed up. Mark shoved the pitch decks into his bag, slamming it shut hard enough to make the table shake. I could feel it coming, the storm. The fallout. The questions. The resentment. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. As soon as we stepped into the hallway, Jenna grabbed my arm, her voice low and tight. "Dad, what the hell was that?" Her eyes were blazing. Mark was a few steps ahead, pacing like a caged animal, gripping his phone so tight I thought he might snap it in half. I looked at her steady. "I wasn't going to sit there and watch you lose this deal. You and Mark were floundering. You needed backup. We didn't need you to hijack the entire pitch," she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of the investors. You made it look like your company." I opened my mouth, but Mark jumped in, his voice loud, sharp. "This is exactly what I was worried about, Jenna. He's trying to take over. This was our vision, our idea, and now it's the old man's show." I turned to Mark, my voice low but firm. "Your vision was half-baked, and you know it. You had buzzwords and a pretty deck, but no foundation. You weren't ready for that room. I saved you from looking like amateurs." He stepped closer, his face red, eyes narrowed. "You're not part of this company, old man. You don't get to decide what happens here." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I stayed calm. "Actually, I am part of this now. You were pitching my patents, my data, my research. Without it, you've got nothing." That shut him up, but the tension was thick. Jenna crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "Is that what this is about, Dad? You want control? You couldn't stand being just moral support, so now you're going to bulldoze your way into this?" I stared at her for a long second. My own daughter. And for the first time, I saw it, how much she wanted to prove herself, even if it meant cutting me out. "I wasn't trying to take control, Jenna," I said quietly. "I was trying to help. But I'm not going to apologize for making sure you didn't blow the biggest meeting of your life." She didn't say anything. Mark muttered something under his breath and stormed off toward the elevators. The silence between Jenna and me was thick, loaded. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to think." And she walked away. The days after that were tense. Jenna didn't call. Mark didn't either. I flew back home to Ohio, sat in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the wall, wondering if I'd just blown up my relationship with my daughter. Then, a week later, I got a letter. Certified mail. It was from a lawyer. A cease and desist. From Jenna's startup. It stated that I had no legal rights to any intellectual property related to the startup, and that I was to stop representing myself as having any ownership or involvement. I stared at it stunned. My own daughter's company, telling me to back off. I sat there for hours, just numb. But then something inside me snapped. I pulled out every document, every signed contract, every patent application. I flipped through them, page by page. They were mine. The core tech mine. The research mine. The customer data mine. They wanted to cut me out. Fine. But it wasn't going to be that easy. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "Yeah, I need to talk to you about something. It's big." By the time I hung up, my heart was pounding, and I knew this wasn't going to be simple. I wasn't just fighting for my intellectual property. I was fighting for the respect my own daughter had stripped from me. Turns out, the situation was even messier than I thought. The patents I'd filed? They weren't officially transferred into the company's name. They were still in mine. The pilot agreements with the small businesses? All addressed to me, not Jenna's startup. And the kicker? Mark had quietly filed a provisional patent for the same algorithm 2 weeks before the pitch meeting. Behind Jenna's back. Behind my back. He'd been trying to cut me out and screw over Jenna at the same time. I felt sick to my stomach. My hands shook as I pieced it all together. That sly ball had been grinning in Jenna's face, playing the loyal co-founder, while plotting to steal it all for himself. I texted Jenna. Just a simple message. Call me. It's important. No response. I called her. Straight to voicemail. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, going over every document, every email. The betrayal was sinking in deeper with each passing hour. The next morning, I called the lawyer again. We're filing a formal demand letter. I'm not letting them get away with this. He agreed. By noon, the letter was drafted, and I sent it directly to Jenna's startup email, Mark's email, and the company's legal team. It was a shot across the bow. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Jenna. Her voice was cold, flat. Why are you doing this, Dad? I took a deep breath. Jenna, you need to understand something. Mark isn't who you think he is. He filed a provisional patent in his own name, without you. He's planning to cut you out. Silence. Then, that's not true. It is. Check the records. I'm not lying. More silence. Then she hung up. The next day, I got an email from one of the investors, one of the few who'd actually shown real interest after the pitch. He wrote, Mr. Douglas, I reviewed your materials. I'd like to have a conversation with you directly. Alone. It hit me hard. The investors weren't buying into Jenna's leadership anymore. They were looking at me as the real key. I didn't respond right away. I waited. 2 days later, Jenna showed up at my doorstep. I hadn't seen her in over a month. She looked exhausted, bags under her eyes, hair a mess, like she hadn't been sleeping. She walked in without saying a word, dropped a stack of papers on my kitchen table. It was a copy of Mark's provisional patent filing. She looked at me, her voice breaking. You were right. The weight of it hit us both at the same time. Jenna sat down, covering her face with her hands. I sat across from her, quiet, letting it sink in. Mark had tried to steal it all. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jenna looked up, her eyes hard now. I'm going to burn him to the ground. Her voice was steady, cold. And in that moment I knew we were in this together now. But the real fight was only beginning. Jenna and I worked together day and night, side by side for the first time in years. The tension was still there, but so was the fire. We had a common enemy now, and it was Mark. First, we went after the patent. Jenna's startup had technically been built around my intellectual property, and with Mark's dirty provisional filing exposed, we had legal leverage. My lawyer sent a formal complaint to the patent office, invalidating Mark's claim and reinforcing my ownership. The lawyer even filed a notice of intent to sue for fraud. Mark tried to fight it, of course. He sent snarky emails, tried to gaslight us into backing down. I didn't bite. Jenna didn't either. We had the paperwork, the contracts, the emails. Everything was airtight. Then came the investors. Jenna called a meeting with every investor who had shown interest. This time, she invited me. Not as moral support, but as co-creator. She told the whole truth. How Mark had tried to file a patent behind her back, how he manipulated the original pitch, and how I'd been the one doing the groundwork all along. The investors were furious, not at us, but at Mark. Turns out, he'd been feeding them half-truths for months, making promises he couldn't deliver on. When Jenna laid out the real numbers, the real research, and the customer pilot data I'd collected, they flipped. One investor, a sharp-tongued woman from New York, said it straight. "Mark's a snake. Get him out of your company, or we're out." And just like that, the tide turned. Jenna called an emergency board meeting. Mark showed up cocky, thinking he had the upper hand. That smirk on his face, it made my blood boil. Until Jenna dropped the bomb. She had the lawyer read the complaint out loud: Mark's fraudulent patent filing, the breach of fiduciary duty, the intent to defraud. She even played an audio recording from a call Mark had with an investor where he tried to poach their money for his own side project. Mark's face went from smug to ashen in seconds. It was over. The board voted him out unanimously. Mark stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the glass. But karma wasn't done with him yet. Turns out, the patent fraud wasn't just a civil issue, it triggered an SEC investigation. They found Mark had been cooking the books, inflating user data in the pitch decks, and lying about customer interest. He got slapped with charges. By the time the dust settled, he was looking at serious fines, maybe even jail time. Jenna and I? We rebuilt the company, together. We rebranded the startup under a new name. I took an advisory role, helping with the strategy, but I let Jenna lead. She earned that. We secured funding from the investors who stuck with us, and within a year, we had paying customers and real revenue. But here's the twist I didn't see coming. One day, Jenna came to me, looking pale. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." She confessed she had known about Mark's patent. He'd told her weeks before the pitch, and she'd gone along with it. She hadn't wanted to believe it, but deep down, she had. She'd wanted so badly for the company to succeed that she ignored the red flags. She let me sit in that room, let Mark whisper that I was just from the analog age, knowing full well the scheme they were pulling. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. For a long time, I just sat there, not saying a word. Then I looked her in the eye and said, "You're my daughter. And I love you. But you need to understand, this wasn't just business. This was betrayal." She nodded, tears in her eyes. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But we kept moving forward. I made her sign a contract, giving me permanent equity in the company, making sure the patent stayed in my name, and locking in my advisory role. No more games. As for Mark? Last I heard, he was living in a rundown apartment in Sacramento, jobless, burned by every investor he'd ever pitched to. His name was mud in the startup world. Nobody would take his calls. That was the price of betrayal. Jenna and I? We turned the company into a success story. Not a unicorn, not a billion-dollar exit, but a steady, growing business. And every time someone asked how we started, Jenna would pause, look at me, and say, "It all began when I thought my dad was just here for moral support." And I'd just smile, because they had no idea.